There seems to be a lot of confusion on what is actually a resto mod and what's a pro touring car. So let's get into that today. So the idea is they basically come in two camps, resto mod and pro touring car. That being said, what do they actually mean? Well, what they technically mean is basically a modified restoration versus a professional touring car. So essentially, it's in the name, right? One is a basically stock car, well, stock-ish car. One is a all-out race car. Seems pretty obvious to most of us. That being said, there are a few things that they share that most people don't realize that can make it either one. So ideally, if you're after a daily driver, you want a car that isn't overly stiff, it's comfortable to ride in, comfortable to drive, comfortable to just be in, and doesn't, make you want to kill yourself by the time you're done driving the car. Well, if that's what you're after, then you're after a resto mod, typically. Resto mods usually come in either stock suspension style or one level up suspension style. Think coilovers for like a standard coil and shocks car. They typically only have maybe 350 to 450 horsepower. Nothing crazy, nothing that you wouldn't drive on a daily basis anyway. But looking deeper, they still have the modern amenities, things like the 4-speed with overdrive, good rear gears, softer suspension, nicer seats, better radio, things that we want in today's daily drivers, you can have in a resto mod. That's the nice thing about having a resto modification vehicle is you can have the old school appeal and feel and still be able to drive the car on a daily basis without hating. I mean, after all, that's what our 1967 Pontiac Le Mans is all about. Then we come to more the pro touring car. These cars are just hard cars, right? The car itself wants to be driven rough. It likes to be beaten on. This car is more at home on track than it is on the street. Now, when I say that with love because I daily drive my pro touring car in this instance, but there are people that do a much better example. I mean, check this example out. This guy built this car, and it's more than you would ever want on the street. Well, more than most guys would ever want on the street, maybe not me or you. But that being said, then you have resto mods. There are things like this that totally attainable, fairly cheap garage built thing that we can do on a regular basis ourselves. And that's really what I'm after and what we're building here with LSX Hunter and you guys. But let's dig a little deeper. So we're going to start with the basic one, the resto mod. So the resto mod can come in factory configurations as far as maybe a Pontiac 400 and a TH350 or a 327 Chevy and a Power Glide. That's totally still a resto mod. As long as you're giving that vehicle a little bump up in suspension, interior, exterior, just something to bring it up the next level. Now, that doesn't mean that LS swap vehicles aren't also resto mods. I know, right? It's kind of something you'd think would be a pro touring type thing or a next level type thing, but in actuality, it's just a drivetrain, right? It's nothing crazy. You're not changing things out that are vehicle altering other than horsepower and torque. We've been doing this since the beginning. But if we take a deeper look, we'll see that resto mod is more about taking the original feel of the vehicle and just modernizing it a hair, not changing the vehicle as a whole, not adding a tube chassis, not adding, things that make the vehicle outlandish for the day. A lot of resto mod people like myself really enjoy period correct modifications, things that would basically be a day 2 type modification, things like a performer RPM air gap. Things that are just kind of a basic add-on. These are basically resto mod type things that you would be able to get the second day of ownership in these vehicles. Now, when you step up to kind of the gray area of resto mod and pro touring, that's where things get kind of muddled. And that depends on the individual. Guys that are building their vehicle for daily driving or just shredding on the road, I'd still technically call those guys resto mod cars. They're guys that aren't chasing numbers per se. Guys like Dutch Boy Customs, they're known for chasing track times and they are absolutely killer at what they do. But I would put them in the pro touring category. I wouldn't call them resto mod because their cars are just better. They're just that much better than everybody else's. And that makes them a pro touring car in my eyes. In a resto mod, I would consider things like R67, Uncle Tony's Dart. There are a bunch of guys all over the internet that have these vehicles. And I'll link the playlist for a bunch of these cars in the card at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. But all that being said, the resto mod cars are a fairly cheap proposition, and that's why they're appealing to a lot of people like myself. A lot of guys that do road rally, resto mods are where it's at. But pro touring cars are where things get fun. They're where things get interesting. These are where builds really take a divergence off into weird things. Technically, something you drive on the street all the time is a purpose-built vehicle for a specific task, and that is why that would be called a pro touring car in this instance. You know, really what we're just saying here is pro touring is pro whatever the task is. So if you're chasing times on Gingerman, if you're chasing times on Laguna Seca, if you're sliding with it, if you are running in a straight line, all of it is a pro something aspect. These pro mod, pro touring type cars are going to have things like changing from leaf springs to coilovers, changing suspension geometries into like a rocker arm type system. You know, there's a lot of things that you could do to these vehicles to make them unlike what they were from factory. And that is what gets away from the restoration part of this and turns it into a more race car type aspect of things. And you might like that. You might be like me and you might enjoy the technicalities of changing things and the interesting aspects of fabrication. But if you're not deep enough into fabrication, Restomods is a perfect example and a perfect way to go, because you're going to get into a car, it's going to be cheap, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But if you want to take it to that next step, there are a ton of guys making great pro touring cars, and we hope to have a few builds featured here over the next little while. But as a general rule of thumb, these are the difference between the Restomod and the pro touring car. The Restomod car is going to be typically a factory drivetrain, though not always. It's going to have a factory style engine, whether it be a small block Chevy, a Pontiac, a Ford, or a Mopar. But it's going to have an upgraded transmission, something with an overdrive. With that being said, it's also going to have some slight suspension upgrades, basically what you would see on day two. These engines are typically 350 to 450 horsepower. We typically see these cars be in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $55,000. Pro touring cars typically will have an upgraded drivetrain, whether it's a factory engine or an upgraded modern style engine. Typically these cars are going to be 500 to 750 plus horsepower. They're going to have upgraded suspension geometries that were not available from factory. They're going to have tubular or major weight loss type things, and they're going to have a big change in the typical feel of the vehicle versus stock. Lastly, they're purpose built for a reason, so they better do what they're doing very well. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you are subscribed, make sure you hit that bell notification just to make sure that you get all of our videos right to your phone. If this video piqued your interest, why don't you check out this one and this playlist I told you guys I'd post up here. Let's go build something.